How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It is the end of the season. The season is over. Thank the Lord that season is over. I'm doing 5 decisive moments in Celtic's season. Let's get straight into it. So before I start, I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who's subscribed to the channel so far throughout the season. I started this at the start of the season, didn't really know what I was doing with it, didn't really know if it would take off, didn't know if anybody would watch, so I'm massively grateful for everybody who has watched and subscribed over the course of the season. And if you haven't, I will be continuing my videos throughout the summer and into next season. Hopefully it's onwards and upwards from here on in, so thank you very much. And if you haven't subscribed, just hit the subscribe button below. The first decisive moment of the season was the appointment of Neil Lennon at the end of the season last season. Technically it happened last season, so I'm cheating a little bit, but this was what would be to come for the next season, and it is the decisive moment because it defined the entire season. Neil Lennon was massively to blame for the mess of this season. Why was he appointed in the shower? Well, he said himself that he was appointed after the Scottish Cup by Peter Lawwell, and the board, for some reason, they decided it was a professional thing to do to appoint the manager to the biggest club in Scotland in the shower in the euphoria of winning a cup final. It's absolutely ridiculous. It was an insane decision in the first place. Neil Lennon came in, did a job, absolutely should have been thanked and said thank you very much for coming in when Brendan Rodgers abandoned us, and see you later. Thank you very much, see you later. That's not how Celtic operates. Celtic operate on short-term wins, short-term gains, long-term losses. That's what's been happening throughout Peter Lawwell's career at Celtic, and it continued on to this season. Neil Lennon was appointed in the euphoria. I don't know if anybody has ever won a cup final at any level. It doesn't matter how big it is. The euphoria you feel after that is insane. You would do anything. You would say yes to anything. Why a professional decision of this magnitude was left in that moment and actually agreed upon in that moment, and also for a club this big, for that to be allowed to pass. You know, it's not really the most above board kind of thing to happen. I know it happens quite a bit. There's loads of stories about things happening in the dressing room afterwards and business decisions being made. But really and truly, for a company the size of this, which it is a company and a club, this sort of decision, the person who's going to be managing the club, the person who's going to be taking the club forward, probably shouldn't be allowed to agree to take on the club for the next season in the shower. Probably should happen in a boardroom. Fast forward to August, and that brings us to decisive moment number 2, and that is the Ferencváros defeat in the Champions League. This was a massive loss for Celtic, and it was one of my first ever real properly angry reaction videos. I didn't really know what was to come for the rest of the season, and it was embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. Ryan Christie playing up front. The team looked lackluster. The team looked slow. Looked like they had no shape. And Ferencváros deserved to win. They deserved to win. They deserved to go to the Champions League. And Celtic didn't. That was the be-all and end-all. And I know this stage of the competition is quite hard for Celtic because a lot of these teams are actually in the middle of their season. Celtic are only getting started. But this was the moment where Duco James was screaming about it. This was the moment where the appointment of Neil Lennon in the shower after a cup final starts to come and really start to haunt us, really start to scare us. And this is the moment where Celtic could have said, okay, right, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have appointed you at the end of the season, or at least we should have given you your own staff. We should have did an interview process. We should have sorted things out, and they should have got rid of Neil Lennon there and then after he failed to qualify for Europe, because Europe is where Celtic should be measuring themselves. They should not be measuring themselves off domestic success, and this is the moment. This is the turning point in the season, because if you sack Neil Lennon then, you're in August, you have the full season ahead of you. You don't have to worry about Champions League, so just get rid of him, get someone in, get the right person in, and save the season. Celtic did not act at this point, and it only gets worse from here. Which brings me to decisive moment number 3, and I'm going to be bunching a load of things in together here, but this was a loaded part of Celtic's season, and this is where the appointment of Neil Lennon in the shower, the defeat to Ferencváros, where everything comes together and reached a peak of absolute shitness and shitterhousery in the Scottish League, and this was where Celtic's season fell apart. And it all stems from the 2-0 defeat to Rangers in October. After that defeat, Celtic get beaten by AC Milan, they get beaten twice by Sparta Prague 4-1, they get beaten by Ross County, they drew with Hibs and drew with Aberdeen. In that period from October to late November, Celtic were out of the Champions League, out of the Europa League, out of the League Cup, and miles behind Rangers in the league already at this point in time. And this for me is the period where the culpability moves from Neil Lennon to the board, because everyone could see that Neil Lennon was finished. Everyone could see that Neil Lennon had lost the dressing room, and this was still a savable season. The league was still there to be won. The points could have been grafted back, and this was the point where the board again failed to act. This was the moment where Celtic fans were most divisive, I think, and it was essentially three bunch of people. There was the pro Neil Lennon side, who said he could turn it around. There was the 1990 group who were saying that the younger fans were being, a bit entitled, and that they weren't used to losing, and that the 90s were much worse. And then you had the younger fans, or the more modern fans, or the more level-headed fans, who were saying that this season is savable if we act now and get rid of this man in charge. This has been a shit show of the season, but we can still turn it around. Nobody listened. The board didn't listen. They kept Neil Lennon in charge under a gentleman's agreement, a weird sort of gentleman's agreement that he would take them into the new year and would reassess in the new year. That's what we were told as fans. And then came the Dubai debacle, the Dubai controversy, the Dubai, whatever you want to label it. It happened in Dubai, and it was the peak of Celtic's season, the peak of Celtic's shit show of a season. And this was an absolute meltdown of a huge magnetism of a club for this to happen in this season. After Christmas, they lose 1-0 to Rangers, and they're 22 points behind. They're 22 points behind at this point in time. They're out of the Champions League, they're out of the Europa League, they're out of the League Cup, and they go to Dubai. Now, a lot has been said about this Dubai trip since it happened, and especially since Rangers have won the league and we've seen the celebrations, and assessing whether or not it was as bad as it was at the point in time. It was terrible. It was a shit show. The reason it was a shit show, and we can't just say now that because Rangers fans were out doing what they did in Georgia Square, that what Celtic did in Dubai was not awful. It was. We were at the height of the pandemic. The league was where we were, as I said, 22 points behind Rangers. It had fallen apart. There were still people dying in Scotland, like massive amount of people dying from COVID at this point in time. And then 13 players came back, and because one of them tested positive, 13 of them plus the manager were ruled out for 2 games, 2 very, very important games. And whatever they did in Dubai, whether it was hot weather training, whatever it was, you didn't get to see any of it because 13 of them were ruled out. And we're talking about a situation where Celtic almost got the league cancelled. They almost, if they played in that game, Christopher Julian played in that game, gave Hibs players COVID, that's the league gone, essentially. So Celtic put the league in serious jeopardy. So it was a massive, massive fumble. And then you have the situation with Neil Lennon coming out. And I made a video about this, the PR person letting Neil Lennon come out and speak about it after 2 weeks of quarantine, when he was clearly angry by the press, when he was clearly angry by the coverage, when he was clearly angry about what Nicola Sturgeon was saying, and letting him go on his little rant. They didn't save Neil Lennon. They didn't do anything to protect him at that point in time. They put the club into disrepute because of the way that they were running it. And it was just an absolute mess. And you're thinking, what the fuck is going on at Celtic right now, where the management are being appointed in the shower, where a knockout of the Champions League from a Hungarian side is not enough to get the manager sacked, where even if you add all that together with a Europa League last place finish and 22 points behind the only rival in the league, that wasn't enough. It still was not enough to get rid of the manager at that point. So this falls on the board. This falls on the decision makers at Celtic, because either they didn't have the balls to make that decision, or they genuinely thought that this was okay. And either of those options are not good enough for Celtic, in my opinion. And this was where Celtic's season fell apart, and it was an embarrassment for the club. It was an embarrassment for everything that the club stood for, and it was just, in one word, it was massively unprofessional the way the club was being run, from the top to the manager. Every single thing was wrong with the club at this point in time. But yet we were told that he could still turn it around, which brings me to decisive moment number 4, and that came in February 21st. Neil Lennon resigned from his post after being beaten by Ross County again. Neil Lennon, his season didn't go the way he wanted to. It's almost as if he should not have been appointed in the shower. Listen, we've spoken about Neil Lennon a lot this season. From me to Ryan 118 to Celtic State of Mind to whatever fan podcasts are out there to the media. It'll be very interesting in 10 years where the opinion goes on Neil Lennon, because he's a massively successful Celtic person. He clearly cares a lot about the club. But if he really cared that much about the club, he would have left way before February. I genuinely believe that he felt that he could turn it around. I genuinely do that. I don't think many people actually bring something forward if they don't think that they are the person to fix it. So I do think Neil Lennon actually thought that he could turn this around for Celtic, and it just didn't work out for him. The board, as I said, in November, that period where Celtic were falling behind the league, out of Europe, all of that, that's where I think it massively jumps onto their lap, and they should have made the decision. It shouldn't have been up to Neil Lennon, by the way. Neil Lennon should not have had to resign. Neil Lennon should have been sacked, and it wouldn't have cost Celtic that much to sack Neil Lennon. And you're saving a man's reputation here, because let's face it, if Neil Lennon left or was sacked in November, before all the Dubai stuff, before all of that period, I think Neil Lennon's reputation is intact when he leaves Celtic. And maybe in 10 years his opinion of Celtic and people's opinion of Neil Lennon might change a little bit. But for the moment, he's a manager who lost 10 in a row in a magnificent fashion. Like an incredibly disastrous fashion, an impressively disastrous fashion. And it just was the wrong appointment of the wrong man at the wrong time in the wrong place. And that's what happens when you run a club unprofessionally like Peter Lawwell has done. Which brings me to decisive moment number 4, and that is Rangers becoming league champions. Don't think any of us hoped that this would happen. I mean, I don't think any Celtic fan would have hoped that Rangers would be lifting the title this year. 10 in a row was in the grasp, and probably if Celtic had the right man in charge, probably if Celtic ran their house correctly, they would be champions this year, because, I mean, the difference between the two sides, I don't believe, is as wide as the league table shows. I think if Celtic had their house in order, it would have been much tighter. Whether or not Rangers would have still won the league, I do question that, and that's not to say what Rangers have done wasn't quite impressive. I mean, they went the league unbeaten, they did quite well in Europe, and they were a really good side this year, but I don't think they're as wide, the gap is as wide as the table shows. And maybe when Celtic decide to appoint a manager and decide to get their house in order before the next season, then we'll see what the crack is with the league title, and we might actually get a proper old school top 2 finish between the two sides where there's not a gap of 10-15 points. And I mean, that's good for the league. But massively disappointing. But as I said, the decisive moments: number 1, Neil Lennon being pointed in the shower; number 2, the Ferencváros defeat; number 3, the stages between October and January where you have the Europa League defeats, the Rangers defeats, the League Cup defeats, not making a decision at that point, Neil Lennon resigning. This all builds up to what is decisive moment number 5, and that's Rangers lifting the league title. If you run your club the way that Celtic has been run this year, that's what happens. Your rivals who have their house in order, they win. That's football. There is no league in the world where you can run a club as badly as Celtic and still win the league title. It really comes down to that. It comes down to the professionalism within Celtic Football Club, comes down to the decision makers, comes down to the bravery in the two clubs as well. I think Celtic have been very conservative over the last 10 years. I've said this already. They need to start building for Europe as opposed to building domestically. It's been a massive fumble on Celtic's behalf to build for this 10 in a row, think that this is what is the be all and end all of the club, to the detriment of the club. And because Rangers have become league champions in such a fashion, because Celtic have been so bad this season. We're looking into a season where Celtic still don't have a manager, where a couple of days after the season has ended. I thought I was a little bit slow putting this video up about my season ending, and Celtic still haven't appointed a manager. So it's amazing to me that Celtic have not got a manager. They've probably got Chris Ryer out the door. Odson Edwards probably gone out the door. Scott Brown's gone. Mohamed El Younusi's gone. Celtic have a massive rebuilding to do, and that can't start until they have a manager. It's amazing. It's amazing to me that Celtic have still not appointed a manager. But anyway, that was the 5 decisive moments from Celtic season. I really, again, thank you very much for watching all my videos throughout the season. If you watched them, if you enjoyed them, I really enjoyed making them. Again, I'm going to continue making them throughout the summer. They might not be as consistent as I was throughout the season, even though I wasn't that consistent all that much, but probably will be 1 a week rather than 2 or 3 a week. And the Huddle Breakdown, we are recording our season ending podcast tomorrow. That'll be going out tomorrow in the usual places, so do watch that. The video will be up as well on Friday probably, and we'll be discussing what's going on then. That will be the last podcast of the year for the Huddle Breakdown, because obviously we don't have any games to analyse. But thank you to everyone who has listened to that as well, and we shall chat to you later.